There are currently 5 episodes of South Park that are banned from being re-aired or streamed, but the most tragic loss is easily the 2-part episodes 200 and 201, written as a massive 200th episode celebration tying all of the show's biggest episodes and stories together into a big event. 200 and 201 were sadly banned for the exact same reason as Super Best Friends and Cartoon Wars, either depicting or discussing the ethics of depicting the Muslim prophet Muhammad. In fact, 201 was censored even further, only aired one single time and has never been officially released in its original form. Just an incredibly sad way to lose one of the biggest events in South Park history. And even though you can't watch it on Max or Paramount Plus, at least we as fans can still celebrate the massive For the Fans 2-part special, even if Comedy Central doesn't want us to. But first, today's video is brought to you by Ekster. Honestly, I've been using an Ekster wallet for a long time, and somehow the new Cardholder Pro is a no-brainer upgrade. This new wallet design is sleeker, it holds more cards, and it even comes with a lifetime warranty. You'll never have to buy another wallet ever again. I genuinely love this ejector mechanism. One of my least favorite scenarios is getting to the bar and struggling to pull my ID out of my wallet. You ever awkwardly hand a bouncer your health insurance card? Never gonna happen again with the Cardholder Pro. It's designed to work simply and make it as easy as possible to retrieve a specific card. Plus, Ekster now makes a whole array of new add-ons, an AirTag backplate, a tool card, and of course classics like the Finder card. If you're interested in an Ekster Cardholder Pro, click my link in the description and use promo code CELLOS and you can get up to 55% off your order. Once again, that promo code is CELLOS. Check out Ekster today. One thing that is clear about 200 and 201 is that Matt Stone and Trey Parker are still probably pretty upset about how it all went down, because a 200th episode celebration tying countless aspects of the show's history together should have been wildly exciting as an achievement for the show and just as a story for the fans.
It should have been such a time for celebration.
Yeah. And the entire conception of this episode was really exciting and pretty self-congratulatory, as it should be. They hit this monumental milestone of 200 episodes, and so they wanted to make something for the fans.
It's our 200th episode. We're going to do the most self-indulgent kind of episode there is. It's going to be, the episode is about the show,
right,
about its biggest controversies, its biggest kind of moments. So it's like, it's by design kind of up our own ass.
The entire idea simply started with them wanting to reward the fans who knew the show inside and out by not only tying in those biggest storylines, but also rehashing some of the biggest controversies that the show has been in over the years. And honestly, the result is nothing short of incredible. As a fan of the series, these are easily 2 of my favorite episodes because the way all of these stories manage to tie together is genuinely seamless. And they lay this intention out in such an immediately funny way, going back to the oldest wells in the show's history.
You should know, fat ass. I'm not fat, you sneaky Jew. Oh God, you guys really? This again?
14 seasons into the show, these typically aren't the types of arguments Cartman and Kyle are having anymore, so they start the episode off basically where the show began. And they even start referencing some of the oldest stories in the show's history so that they can lay out exactly what the episode is going to be doing.
I have a dad, butthole. My mom is my dad. You guys, stop! All you're doing is rehashing a bunch of old stuff. It's
a pretty funny way to start an episode that is rehash central, and immediately following this, they lean into the first real-world controversy that they reference in the 2-parter, which is Tom Cruise focused.
Hey guys, check it out! Tom Cruise is a fudge packer!
This is a follow-up to the episode Trapped in the Closet, basically making the same joke again at Tom's expense. In that one, Tom locked himself in Stan's closet and wouldn't come out, leading to the characters repeating the phrase, "Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet," over and over again. So the fudge packing joke is just a new variation on this same thing, and this entire concept was in reference to the rumored litigious tendencies of Cruise when people would speculate about his sexuality.
Dude, you are in a fudge factory packing fudge.
Oh, that does it. I will sue you!
Trapped in the Closet was one of the biggest South Park controversies that bled into the larger media landscape. Cruise had a deal with Viacom at the time, who also produced South Park, and the episode allegedly caused a huge rift, leading to the episode being pulled from the airwaves for a time. So it makes sense for this to be one of the big focal controversies that South Park leaned into for this celebration.
You just had to push it, didn't you, Stan? You just had to make fun of Tom Cruise again!
But I think the way they tied it to the history of South Park is particularly ingenious. Cruz basically gathers every single celebrity that has ever been made fun of by South Park to move forward with a big class action lawsuit and stop South Park from ever making fun of them ever again. Such a fun but simple way to tie it to nearly every episode in the show's history, and also just to embrace the general perception of the show, that they aren't afraid to make fun of any celebrity. But there's one South Park controversy that made bigger waves than the whole Tom Cruise Scientology angle, and as this is a huge celebration of all of South Park's biggest moments, of course they'd want to include that too.
We can't do a big show about our biggest controversial things without doing one with the prophet of the Muslim faith. So we'll put that in there too. And it really wasn't even, honestly, it was just one of many things.
Though the Cartoon Wars episodes that preceded this were the subject of censorship for their conversation surrounding Muhammad, Matt and Trey definitely did not anticipate that it would become an even bigger issue this time around, though we'll get to that more in the second part. But as written, the implementation of the Muhammad controversy is just so ingeniously executed within this story. Tom Cruise is a dude and South Park character who absolutely hates getting made fun of, and in this story, he's desperate to make that stop. And historically, there is one person who has ever had the ability to circumvent South Park's ridicule.
Muhammad, the prophet of the Muslim faith.
That's tricky.
The idea of all of the subjects of South Park's ongoing lambasting desperately pining for whatever magical quality Muhammad has so that they themselves can avoid any future lambasting is just so funny. A perfect way to tie their biggest controversies in with the entire history and perception of the show. But I think how the town responds to the Muhammad request is incredibly funny as well, and there's some solid metatextual backstory to it, as they panic about how they'll possibly bring Muhammad to South Park, and Stan casually reveals that he saw Muhammad one time when he had to save his friends from David Blaine's cult.
I had to go to the super best friends to rescue them. Muhammad was one of the super best friends.
This is funny on a few levels. Obviously, there is the fact that the other banned episode of South Park is the Super Best Friends, which depicted Muhammad before any of these controversies. But Garrison and the townspeople's shocked reaction here actually adds another layer.
Oh, and what? And he was just out in the open where everyone could see him and nobody got bombed?
No, dude, it was totally fine.
This is basically Matt and Trey poking fun at how Comedy Central execs reacted during the events of the Cartoon Wars special, who had absolutely no idea that they had already done a Muhammad episode prior to the controversy.
Well, do you know that there's a show running on your network right now with Muhammad? And they were like, what's that? We're like, South Park. And we said, there's an episode we made 4 years ago with Muhammad in it, and you're rerunning it on your network, and so are all these other syndicated, networks. And they said, really?
I love how often Matt and Trey use these real-life experiences and interactions and mold them into their episode plots. That's actually how the entire story of Cartoon Wars came to be. Once the network pushed back on them showing Muhammad, they just made the entire story about a TV network refusing to show Muhammad. And you can see remnants of these writing tendencies here. They also used some ideas that they were considering in certain ways back in Cartoon Wars here in 200 and 201. In the commentary, they talked about how they were planning to try and show Muhammad in the Terrence and Phillip special so that he would just look like a Canadian block-headed character without any real defining characteristics.
We were going to have the guy come up and say, I'm Muhammad. And then say, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. But maybe I am. And then give that to Comedy Central and see what they,
Right.
Well, I guess you kind of can show them.
This is basically the exact same idea they use here in 200 and 201 in other ways, like Randy's stick figure sketch of Muhammad.
Is that okay to show?
I don't know.
The entire two-parter is kind of them pushing the limits of how they can depict Muhammad and debating what's okay, which I'm sure is what they were debating with the network. Like in this later scene where you can hear him sort of whisper from the back of this U-Haul.
Welcome. Oh, is that okay?
I don't know.
It's funny how much of this just represents that push and pull with the network. And in that sense, this really does celebrate everything about South Park. And that also includes even more seamless weaving together of previous episodes.
Jennifer Lopez!
Cartman using the whole Jennifer Lopez alter ego to try and capitalize on the celebrity lawsuit. I mean, it basically writes itself. That is vintage Cartman. The entire first episode builds up this conflict in such an unbelievably satisfying way. Every few minutes, they reintroduce another classic South Park story, and every time it somehow feels like a magic trick, where it obviously fits in perfectly, but each subsequent reveal becomes more exciting. Like bringing back the Ginger Pride group, who also wants to use Muhammad so they won't be ridiculed anymore. Fits like a glove love, and they're used to then represent the terrorist threats that the whole Cartoon Wars controversy was about in the first place. Honestly, I don't remember being much more excited for a South Park episode than I was for 201, given how brilliantly they set up all of these nostalgic pieces of the story, especially with the final cliffhanger, bringing back new spins on old Season 1 stories. I mean, I lost my mind when they reintroduced the redesigned Mecha-Streisand, who had barely even been mentioned since that first season episode, but I also can't pretend I wasn't kind of emotionally invested in the other aspect of the cliffhanger, the promise that we might get a new answer to the oldest mystery in South Park.
God damn it, Garrison. Who is my father?
Now, this was obviously the subject of the Season 1 finale, which itself was a cliffhanger and the first ever two-part story in South Park history. So, I mean, what a great way to end this cliffhanger of a big celebratory two-part episode. I really can't say enough about how stoked I was about this when it aired. They managed to tie together the stories from Trapped in the Closet, Cartoon Wars, Super Best Friends, Fat Button Pancake Head, Ginger Kids, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, and Mecha-Streisand totally seamlessly. And that's not even including the episodes that introduced all of the angry celebrities they use here as well. But of course, between the first and second episode is where everything went wrong for the future of this story.
Because it was the second part where basically all the shit hit the fan while we were making part 2.
While making 201, Comedy Central went into full-on panic mode about the Muhammad storyline. So much so that they completely censored the version that Matt and Trey delivered.
The way we intended this to air never got aired. It got changed.
And it's pretty obvious from the beginning. They literally bleeped the name Muhammad, which appears 36 times in the script. And honestly, they made it borderline unwatchable.
Okay, so, see? That isn't that's Santa Claus.
Boys, you got Santa to be when?
When you all said you were gonna hand over to Tom Cruise.
Luckily, though the uncensored version has never been officially released, it was heisted from the South Park Studios servers and distributed online. So luckily, if you do a little digging, you don't ever have to watch the censored version ever again. And there is a lot to talk about with the uncensored version, but we'll get there. I will admit there are maybe a couple inclusions that are a tiny bit forced in 201. Santa Claus being in the mascot outfit was fine as the twist, but it definitely felt a little shoehorned that it was Mr. Hankey's idea. He just kind of pops in for a moment here like he was a required inclusion or an afterthought, really. Though I do think another character who pops in for just a moment is a pretty funny inclusion. Maybe the most hated kid in South Park. Pip makes his first speaking appearance since like season 6. And I'm not gonna lie, this is a pretty hilarious way to celebrate your 200th episode.
My name is Pip. I would like to see if you wouldn't mind not smashing our little town to bits.
Genuinely the final appearance of Pip, unless you count the Hall of Honor in Stick of Truth. Mecha-Streisand's rampage is also used to pretty nostalgic effect. She immediately smashes Casa Bonita and then starts taking out most of the other restaurants they've featured in the show, including Raisins. Sadly, we didn't get the return of Robert Smith. Instead, they make her face off with the Super Best Friends.
That's enough, Barbara Streisand! Cue up!
But again, that's fitting. The Super Best Friends and Mecha-Streisand were both implemented into the last episode, so of course, make the superhero team fight the giant monster. Yeah, this episode immediately has a lot going on, but once again, it's a pretty seamless integration of all of these different nostalgic callbacks. I also love the way that this episode is basically South Park arguing with itself about which version of the show they prefer. The sillier, dramatic, character-focused stuff, or the bigger social commentary and satire. All of the boys end up at Mephisto's lab of all places, another character who hadn't had a speaking role since season 4, but the way the boys get there separately is once again incredibly well woven. Cartman is obviously going there to ask about his father, as that was the primary location in the season 1 finale, and the other boys decide to ask Mephisto to clone Muhammad so they can give his clones to both the Gingers and the celebrities. But this argument between Cartman and the other boys is just exactly the South Park internal struggle boiled down.
Dude, nobody gives a crap about who your stupid father is. Muhammad is an important issue with actual ethical ramifications.
I guarantee you, people care way more about who my father is.
It's the show's older tendencies versus the newer tendencies, the kids' adventures versus the social commentary, all in one piece of dialogue. And I have to admit, while the message they eventually get to and censor, R.E. Muhammad, is important, as a fan of South Park, the thing that blew my mind about this episode was absolutely the reveal of who Cartman's father is, which basically came in the form of a bunch of mini reveals before the big one. They hype up the idea that the Gingers have some off-screen boss who has something special planned for Cartman, and oh boy does he.
Revenge is a dish best served chili. Scott Tenorman? Ew.
Man, I love how Tenorman's voice is just completely changed from his first appearance. It's like Scott is doing his best Joker impression from those years spent spiraling over what Eric did. And I don't know why I hadn't thought about Scott Tenorman going into the end of this story, despite the fact that he is a massive fulcrum point for Cartman. I actually made an entire video about this earlier in the year. Scott Tenorman Must Die is not just one of the most beloved and nostalgic episodes of the entire series, it's the episode that completely changed the trajectory of Cartman as a character. Modern Cartman was born at that first ChiliCon carnival, and it's definitely one of the most evil things Cartman has ever done. So for the reveal that Scott had been biding his time preparing his revenge is perfect. If you remember the season 1 finale and season 2 premiere, there were a ton of characters that were floated as Eric's possible father, but there was one that always felt like a gag, just something funny to include in the lineup. Well,
We have something in common. Did I ever tell you that my father played for the Denver Broncos? No.
okay, this is also maybe something that's just a little convenient in their rewriting of South Park history, but come on, it is worth it for this reveal. To bring everything together in this ridiculously self-indulgent celebration, take the most infamous thing that Cartman had ever done and force him to reckon with it as though it had happened to him.
You killed your own father, and then you fed him to your half-brother!
There is obviously a lot of other stuff going down at the end of this episode. The super best friends stop Mecha-Streisand by baiting her with a duet with Neil Diamond. Tom Cruise manages to give himself Muhammad's goo and is censored for a little while until they reveal that he has semen on his back. But really, all of this stuff gets overshadowed by this huge South Park lore bomb. And this huge reveal, upending years-long canon, really got the short end of the deal here, and Matt and Trey know it.
What we thought was far more important and far more interesting was that we were finally going to answer who Eric. We were bringing back the way bigger than the Prophet of Muslim Faith was. Eric Cartman actually did have a father, and we're going to reveal it.
This is one of the biggest developments in South Park history for Eric Cartman as a character, and yet these episodes are not able to be legally streamed. The only way to watch them is to own the Blu-rays, and even then 201 is the censored version. But the reveal that Scott Tenorman is actually Eric Cartman's half-brother is hidden behind physical media or piracy. So if they ever want to follow up this major development again, they have to trust that enough fans of the show know this history or have sought out these specials outside of the current streaming landscape. And that is a huge shame, because there is so much you can do with this piece of lore, and yet it feels like this will never be followed up again.
I'll be back, super best friends!
Who's the creepy ginger kid?
In the aired and DVD versions of the episode, there is a customary big final speech from Kyle with a little input from Jesus and Santa, and this is how it aired.
You see, I learned something today.
Though this plays like South Park making a joke about censorship, this was not what Matt and Trey wanted to air. The following day, they released this statement. In the 14 years we've been doing South Park, we have never done a show that we couldn't stand behind. We delivered our version of the show to Comedy Central, and they made a determination to alter the episode. It wasn't some meta joke on our part. Comedy Central added the bleeps. In fact, Kyle's customary final speech was about intimidation and fear. It didn't mention Muhammad at all, but it got bleeped too. So the final speech in this episode was a tongue-in-cheek lesson about intimidation and fear, and about how threatening violence works. And ironically, Comedy Central gave into that intimidation and fear and proved this message right. Comedy Central doesn't want you to hear this final speech. I'll play it for you though.
It was because of the magical power of threatening people with violence. That's obviously the only true power. If there's anything we've all learned, it's that terrorizing people works.
I think the pointed inclusion of both Jesus and Santa Claus making these claims is also a pretty specific jab at the double standard in terms of depicting one religious figure versus another.
Don't you see, Gingers? If you don't want to be made fun of anymore, all you need are guns and bombs to get people to stop.
I don't know if Comedy Central thought this would provoke a response, or if they thought people would be too stupid not to understand the sarcastic nature of the message, but it really is telling that this is the message that was censored. Luckily, the episode still has a few pretty great wrap-up sequences after this, so it doesn't end on this confusing censored note. In classic Cartman fashion, he takes the entirely wrong thing away from the reveal about Scott and his father, lamenting the fact that he is in fact a ginger, before Mitch Connor cheers him up.
You're also half Denver Bronco. That makes you pretty cool.
Hey,
You're right. That does make me pretty keen.
And honestly, in one of my favorite comedic reveals in series history, they used Tom Cruise to deliver one final throwback reference, and once again, it feels like a magic trick. Cruise cries over the fact that there's nowhere he can go where he can't be ridiculed.
Hey, we know a place. We know a place where everything is just happiness and joy, and no humans are there to mess it up.
And then, hard cut to Cruise's body on the moon next to a dead orca whale, a perfect callback to Free Wilsieks. As a fan of this show, 200 and 201 is such a bittersweet thing. It is such an amazing celebration of everything South Park, and yet it's completely overshadowed by the controversy that led to it being banned from the airwaves. But I have to say, isn't that pretty fitting for South Park? That the biggest, most celebratory, self-indulgent episode is also the one that got the harshest brunt of controversy in their entire history. And if nothing else, it sadly did prove its own message correct.
The only true power is violence.
Yeah.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.